This is Beyond the Weekend, a podcast of Cornerstone Church, where we dig into the things we didn't have time for on Sunday. Welcome to BTW. Welcome back to Beyond the Weekend. We took a little break for our Romans series because we realized there wasn't a lot more to talk about with just 2 verses in a series. So we're back with this series where we have plenty to talk about because we're going through a whole book of the Bible. The new series is called Undivided, and it's about the book of Galatians. And I'm being joined today by Pastor Alex Fernandez. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you.
And let's get into it. This is an interesting book of the Bible, an interesting time to be studying this and picking this topic. Why don't you share a little bit about why we're doing this series?
Yeah, so this one I shared at the beginning of my message yesterday that this one's been on my heart for 4 years. In that, for those who've been around Cornerstone for a number of years, we did an Undivided study back in 2020.
That's right.
It wasn't a sermon series. But because of the unrest of the world, there was a lot of things around race and politics and things that were happening in 2020. There was a great study that came out, and I walked people through in the Zoom days. Remember when we were doing everything on Zoom? Mm-hmm. And it was a good foundation for what we were going through, and it was a study in the book of Galatians. So I've kept this one in the background, hoping that we wouldn't need to do something like this 4 years later, but also suspecting that what we see in the world is more division, is, the stuff that we see. And I hear a lot of people talk about that they're kind of tired of, but yet the world is still falling into the cycle. And so here we are in another election season. And it's not just politics, but I find that people are struggling with unity. And that division is on the table again. So this is a timely series, and I think the book of Galatians is as relevant today as it was then. Mm-hmm. And because it highlights, we often lift up the early church as the model, but not long after the church got started, they were starting to experience problems just like we have today. Yeah. And so that's what I love about Scripture is that there's some brutal honesty in Galatians. There's conflict in Galatians that really affect all the churches if you read Paul's letters, because he talks about the topic of unity so much. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of a case study early on of how things can get off track if people are divided by things that permeate their way into the church.
Right. Yeah, I love, and we highlighted this on Sunday, but just the shift from Paul kind of saying, greetings, grace and peace, and then
I'm astonished
that you're so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. He really just cuts right to it.
Yeah. Imagine getting that letter. Yeah, so he doesn't pull any punches. There's something that he's really upset about. Right. And he loves Jesus so much, and the good news that Jesus is so freeing that he's bewildered that some things gotten them off track or really created some division within the church body. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting, too, because it's, and I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday as well, but it's not some minor issue. It's not as if Paul's writing about just a disagreement about the way that they do communion or something like that. But the reason for his anger, I think you can hear anger in his voice and his fervency and how he's talking to them, is because he realizes there's a danger to the heart of the gospel that could happen here if it's let go, and that's this interesting, this other group that's developed in the church are the Jewish Christians who are understandably wanting to cling to some of their old ways, and insisting that that's the way that everybody should be faithful. They've for hundreds of years have been, practicing being the people of God by practicing circumcision, by observing the law, and to suddenly have that go out the window would be kind of a shock. So I think, we can have some sympathy for them.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's kind of a hard message to grasp and believe that faith in Jesus is enough.
Right.
That grace is enough. I think I run into Christians all the time who struggle with their pastor, their president, and trying to please God, and am I disappointing God because of something that's going on? So, I mean, that's not uncommon. And so for people who have been devout followers of Yahweh, God, for so long, who had the history of things being passed down to Moses in generation after generation, and it's these customs, it's these laws, it's these things that make you right with God, and then all of a sudden just throw that away. It had to mean something. And so anybody from a different denomination that's come to Cornerstone, whether it's Catholicism, there might be prayers and things that you do that you still hold dear to you because they mean something, or if you're Baptist and the sacraments mean something different, or anything else, we carry with us these things that we do and think, and they mean something. And so if somebody just came along and said, that doesn't matter. Yeah. That's kind of what's happening here. And they're so different than Paul, because Paul at the beginning, he was a Pharisee who wanted to destroy the movement. Yeah. So he's working against this movement. These are Jewish followers of Jesus who believe Jesus is the Christ. Right. But they're just struggling with the understanding of how does that... The how. Yeah. Why is what everything we learned
out the window? Well, and especially I think it's difficult because we really do have a hard time understanding this because there isn't a parallel today, but the clean, unclean, the purity, that was a linchpin of the faith. Yeah. And so to suddenly be in with these people you considered to be unclean before, who are eating pigs and, not observing the hand washing and all of that, to suddenly, you're my brother or sister, no, wait, you should be doing a few of these things. Right. I have great sympathy for, as somebody who's a rule follower, eldest child, I have sympathy for that. But it goes to show just how radical this concept of grace is, and forgiveness, and the fact that God can let go of your sin, so you need to be able to let go of your sin too, and other people's as well. Yeah. It just goes to show how new this all was, and foreign, and they're just wrestling this out. How does this supposed to look for us now? Yeah. So, which I think is still true today. We still have little things creep in that people are like, you're not a real Christian unless you do X, Y, or Z. So as we think about Galatians now, in this current, we've got, nothing important happening next month at all in this country, in a time of great division, maybe more than ever. Why is it important for us as Christians to kind of be thinking about this and wrestling with this?
Yeah. Something you just said a moment ago. It's hard to draw the parallel when you just read the words out of Galatians, because it doesn't seem like what we're living. But this is a multi-ethnic, multiracial church that's struggling with the mixing of people in different lifestyles and different beliefs and different approaches and all that kind of stuff, which I think we can relate with. And then Paul's upset about the perversion of the gospel that the Judaizers were bringing, basically saying, "Hey, Gentiles, you're not quite like us, so you need to change. You need to become like us to be saved." Right. And so that really upsets him. But then it created this inferiority within the church body, And so I'm trying to imagine as a Gentile how I would feel in a congregation that's supposed to be loving and supposed to be following Jesus, but I'm supposed to believe that I'm lesser than, right? Yeah. So that's happening in that, and so that's pitting people against each other. And so today, we're not wrestling with diet and customs and laws, but what we are wrestling with is things that are happening in the culture around us. And I think one of the challenges, if we just call it out, is the blend of politics and religion today, specifically Christianity. And the challenge, I would say, for anybody listening who considers themselves a conservative Christian or a liberal Christian, when you think about politics, and how do you exist together? How do these things align? Do they align? And I have some real hard thoughts on that, because I think you may hear different from different pastors and churches, but I just see the lane that kingdom life and politics are going in are so opposing that I don't get upset with Christians or anybody in terms of who you vote for and all that kind of stuff. I think voting is your civic duty. I think you should care about the policies that and the laws that happen and have convictions. I think all that's true. I get really nervous when I hear a message coming from pastors and churches where they blend politics and religion as if they're one and the same.
Yeah.
Because I think they're so different. And I'll boil it down to this. Politics in our present day, this is very different from when I grew up. You think back decades ago, I think long gone are the days of politics where it's about compromise, it's about policy, it's about subtle differences between, civic issues. Politics in our present day is all about, doesn't matter the ideology, left or right, it's all about money and power. And the means to get those two things is division. It's no longer a debate. I don't hear too many people debate policy anymore. I don't hear anybody talk about the differences between their infrastructure package or their medical. I mean, I haven't even heard anybody really talk about that in debates. The politics of our present day, I see as that person is a bad candidate. The people that follow them are bad people. You should fear where they're going and what they believe, therefore vote for me. And that happens on both sides. And that's the means to money and power. It's manipulative. I would just say that. Kingdom living, that shouldn't offend anybody. I mean, look at the politics of whatever lane you're in. Prove me wrong. Money, power, division. Kingdom living is so different. Jesus' approach is all about sacrifice, surrender. Those are two polar opposites of money and power. And the goal is unity. That's what Paul writes about in Galatians and Ephesians and Philippians and
the means is love.
And the means is love and compassion. Yeah. So, and that's the opposite of division.
Right.
So when I say they are in two opposing lanes, it's like there's two river flows that are moving in a different direction. And so the challenge for Christians is, how do I navigate caring about social issues like politics, but also what does that mean for me in living and putting Jesus as a priority in my life?
Yeah. There's a lot here, but one thing that came to mind as you were talking is just that I've noticed that it's in the interest of not just, and I would say not just political candidates, but also, anybody's in the media business, social media and news outlets. They want clicks. That's something else that's changed, over our lifetimes. And so it's in everybody's interest to kind of create a scarcity mindset of fear, a lack, focus on what you don't have, or focus on protecting what you have, and
blame other people for your problems.
And so there's a real drumbeat in culture that is anti-Christ, and that's regardless of, we're not being partisan here, but and so there is this kind of countercultural call of Christ to keep your eyes on Christ. And, like you said, we can still care for this stuff. It affects our lives, or maybe it doesn't affect your life, but it affects your neighbor's life. We're called to care about this stuff because it's how our communities run and how our states and countries run. So we're still called to care and not bury our heads in the sand. But at the same time, I think we need to be have more eyes open to the ways that this is calling us to a different focus, is trying to shift our eyes off of Christ and either focus on ourselves or focus on, I don't know, whatever they're trying to do with the fear-based stuff, to kind of move Jesus off the throne of our lives is really the ultimate goal. I don't know, it's a interesting time to be following Christ. I'm not saying it's it's simple because we're talking about sometimes complicated issues of economics, or we're talking about big things like that, and it's not simple, and it's also not. I don't know. I'm trying to be careful. I don't want to offend anybody. Well, I think what we're just really trying to say is that in this time, we just have to be careful to not blend our politics and our religion into one thing.
That's the thing that worries me.
Yeah, is
that people get so consumed around these times and seasons that with politics, for example, that in some ways there's things that become idols for them, that it becomes such a focus. Anything that's, making your heart and your mind look at other people with disdain should be a warning, and disgust should be a warning flag for you.
Yeah.
Because that's not where Jesus is drawing us towards. That doesn't mean there's not evil in the world. Don't get me wrong. But I even said this on Sunday. Jesus told us, on this rock, I'm building this church, and the gates of Hades will not stop it. So Satan is not going to defeat the church. Evil's not going to defeat the church. The biggest threat, and this is what Paul is talking about, the biggest threat to the church is that it crumbles from the inside out, that the people within the church become divided and no longer are living in a way that they want to live in community and unity with one another, with the people who are different from them. This is the struggle that the Jews and the Gentiles were having, that it creates walls, it creates exclusion, it creates lack of harmony, and then things crumble. Yeah. That's the danger. That's the threat. And so for the Galatian church, it was one topic, but in our present day, it could be anything. Right. And if it finds its way into the church, that's why I love what you just said. We have to be really careful on our conviction and our passion around things like politics, because if it's affecting our heart and our mind in a way that pushes us away from the desire to do what Jesus wants, and that's to have unity and care and compassion for God and one another, it's going to be a really difficult road to try to tiptoe on and navigate, because you got both feet in different lanes, right? That oppose each other. And so you're going to be off balance a lot, and you're going to be wrestling with a lot of stuff in your heart. And so that's what we're struggling with in Galatians 1. We're going to get into more in Galatians 2, but that's the start of it, and that's why it's relevant to us. Right. You also talked a little bit about the focusing on Jesus and the fruit of the Spirit. So if not, so what do we do? Right. Right.
I mean, that's the challenge. It's such a challenging time because we're getting a lot of narratives thrown at us that would say, if just be afraid, of other people, and I think what Jesus is saying, what Paul is saying is, Jesus prayed for the unity of the church, that they would be one, so that people would know that you sent me. Yeah. And so that's what's at stake here, because I think we see ample examples of, humanity is bad at this just on our own. We're not really capable. We will sometimes find common causes to rally around and unite around. We've seen that over history. But really the ultimate example that God is real, that the Spirit moves in people and transforms people, is people who should not be in relationship being in relationship.
Yeah, if there's nothing we get out of this series, it's that. Right. It is the only thing that would make us relevant in the culture that we live in today. Yeah. Because if we model what's outside in the world that we see, and it's inside the church walls, or they see this image projected from Christians, it takes away our witness and our relevance
Yes.
in the world. Why be a follower of Jesus if it looks no different
Right.
than anything else?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you hit it. There is so much at stake here for Christians to get this right, because this is the opportunity at a time the world needs it the most, that they see something different. And if the different is simply people who don't agree on a lot of things still having care and compassion and love for one another, that would make such a difference in this world.
Yeah.
That would make it would shatter mindsets, and it would break paradigms. It's like, how are those people figuring it out?
Right.
And the piece that is disheartening is that I see in many Christian circles, I'm not talking about Cornerstone, but I hear church leaders or churches, and you guys are on social media. You hear that there's voices within Christianity that think we should be more moving towards division. And
Right.
I'm like, man, like Paul, I'm saying that's a false gospel.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is a false. That's like the Judaizers that Paul is calling out, saying that's how. I'm astonished that you believe that. That's what he tells the Galatians, and I would say the same to Christians. I'm astonished that you believe that, because where in the scriptures do you see division and disunity as the end means? I don't see that anywhere in the gospel, in the gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in the writings of Paul, in the book of Revelation. This is all going towards every tribe, every nation, bowing, and that's an image of like this multi-ethnic, multi-church who don't even speak the same language, coming
Right.
together all under the authority of Christ. The only way you get there is if it's embodied within the church.
Right.
And so I'll be the voice. That's a false gospel. If you're
Yeah.
hearing that, that's a false gospel in present day.
Absolutely right. Yeah. When Jesus says, love God, love neighbor, is really just like what it boils down to. And so if there's anything that's pulling us away from love of God and love of neighbor and telling us, it's something else, it's getting in power, it's, X, Y, or Z, like that is a false gospel.
Yeah. And if I can hear some of the voices already maybe out there saying, well, but we should have convictions, and we should have, does the scripture not have authority and all that kind of stuff? Yeah. But I mean, in our questions as we wrestle with this, I believe that those same questions should draw us to be more curious about people, to draw us towards people, to understand people, for them to understand us. That's where it should be drawing us, not to exclude people, to demonize people, to, and that's unfortunately what's happening in a lot of churches. I said this too. I was in Georgia at a conference, and I heard Carrie Newhoff speak, and Carrie said the fastest churches in America, or fastest growing churches in America right now, are those that are preaching division, and they wouldn't call it hate, but it's division and exclusion. And you're talking to an echo chamber there. And it probably would be easier. He even said it's easy to build churches like that. But it's really hard to navigate where we're trying to navigate as a church, where we call it the messy middle, and we're trying to bring people together that may not share every thought, but we want to show them the things that they have more in common than they do have differences. And that's a hard mission field.
It really is.
And I hope that the people of Cornerstone recognize the beauty in that, because I truly believe that's living out kingdom living.
Yeah.
If we can figure it out.
It is harder, but it also, it's also crucial.
crucial.
I mean, there's not been a more crucial time to try and live this out than now. So we have each other. We have this study, this series study. If you want to come to Wednesday nights at every campus, if you're not connected into any kind of group and you want to get to know some people at Cornerstone, it's a great way to have some dinner, get to know some other people, get through some questions about the past week's sermon and the book of Galatians that were on that for that week.
Let me plug your
sign
work.
up online.
Mandy's an incredible resource to our team. She and the discipleship team, specifically Mandy, put together Bible reading plans that are there for every series.
Yeah.
So if on a Sunday you hear a message, you're like, how can I get more into this? There's a Bible reading plan that goes along with it that she provides that helps you navigate through the week. There's a discussion guide discussion questions.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're finding a group to do this with. You could do them on your own, but we'll always encourage you to find a group, and that's what you're talking about with you around the table. This is a great way for people to connect who are unconnected. So we're trying to resource you the best, and I would say what I always say in any study, if you can get in a group and wrestle with the Word of God with some other people, you're going to grow so much more.
Yes.
Because honestly, we all have so many questions, and our questions spur on thought and in many ways community with one another, and you recognize like, oh, I'm not the only person who thinks that, or I'm not the only person who has these questions. And so I really encourage you through this series to go on the journey with us, to invest more time in this crucial season, because I think we'll be better for it.
And to be in relationship with people who aren't just like you is just putting this into practice. Like you have that chance to get to know some other people who may not vote like you, may not think like you, may have whole different set of life experiences. And that's where the good stuff happens.
Yeah. I often think this as we're talking, I think there's probably a mindset at Cornerstone sometimes where there's some assumptions that everybody here thinks and votes like me or whatever when it comes to politics. I think they'd be astonished at the amount of people who are in different places, and as Christians, there's not single issue voters all the time. And you never know what is a conviction of somebody else, or what their personal life may be, or their economic status of why they would vote a certain way. But if we can stay away from demonizing people that don't vote like us, that's a great first step to get to know people and understand their perspective, understand their walk,
right?
And how they're trying to do that as a Christian too. Yeah.
So good stuff, challenging stuff. We hope you'll hang with us through this series as we discover what God has for us in these weeks leading up to the election. And thanks for
just chapter 1 as I closed out
chapter
on
1.
Like that's just chapter 1. It gets messier
from here.
5
more, 5 more weeks. All right. Thanks, Alex. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.